You're listening to The Adventuring Party, talking about gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm Owen.
I'm SavageMick.
And I'm Scarr.
And today we're talking about rolls, dice rolls, and distinctions therein.
I thought we were talking about just the one roll, and by which I mean the one roll, the dreaded one. The utter abject, no holds barred, no negotiation failure.
Oh yeah.
Did I get that wrong?
Well, yeah. The single points of failure are bad. Like if you're relying on a single roll to determine, whether a game goes on or not, then that may not be a very well thought out roll.
It's so tense, so dramatic. Feel the excitement. Everyone stands up.
And then the game.
Is there nothing to be said for them?
Consequences you can come back from are a bit more playable, though.
True. Very true. Okay.
Well, in older games, we got around the problem of one dice roll destroying the party, by just saying, "Oh, we still want to play. Let's just make a new party." That's
that TPK that came out suddenly.
We had our effect on the world. There's now a crater there. That's the same. That's interacting with the world system, isn't it?
I mean, he's not technically incorrect. But yeah, there was an interesting pair of blog posts I ran across, and they mainly had to do with the 1977 edition of a little known RPG called Traveller. Well, actually one of the founding RPGs, but and the first edition had this very interesting paragraph, skills and the referee, and it goes. It is impossible for any table of information to cover all aspects of every potential situation, and the above listing is by no means complete in its coverage of the effects of skills. This is where the referee becomes an important part of the game process. The above listing of skills and game effects must necessarily be taken as a guide and followed, altered, or ignored as the actual situation dictates. And the significance being that it tells the referee and the players how to play the game. And for some reason that got cut from future editions of Traveller, which seems to have led to a bunch of problems.
In essence, I've read the articles. In essence, the person quoting this is making the argument that the original rules, which one presumes he prefers, didn't have set universal systems for resolving a skill roll. It was instead up to the GM to choose which system worked best in the situation he had, and that part of it is that it provides essentially a probability chart for the bell curve of rolling different numbers of dice, to which I would assume, and this is interpretation encouraging, so I feel relatively okay just going this. I assume a GM was expected to look at this and then, based on their interpretation of the probabilities of game, choose a number of dice to roll and compare to parties, the character skills based on the situation, rather than saying, "Oh, you have +3 in computers or whatever. Just roll 2d6, add it, and if you get 10 or more, we'll call it good." The idea being that that a universal system was to the designers of Travelers not only something they didn't include, something they didn't think was really useful to include, because in their 1970s, role playing is 4 years old mindset, the game was just too unpredictable to have universal systems be that useful. And that's a very interesting point. And there's an awful lot of people, particularly what we would call OSR people today, who would agree with that. But history has gone in another direction. And Anyone else have any thoughts on that hot take?
It's an interesting passage, and as we'll link in the show notes to the blog in question, which is Tales to Astound by somebody who's written at length on this, and they make this point that what essentially this boils out to is that, okay, look, here's the idea. We're going to assign a bunch of numbers to these attributes, your skills and whatever, but by no means take it for granted that there's some sort of grand unifying theory that underpins all of this. Then, you're going to figure out at the table on the day in the situation how these numbers might apply or how they might be interpreted. And that's something that we don't see a lot of anymore. It's a very much I think it's kind of the Linux mindset. Just build in the calls. We'll figure out how to use them later. So it's as Scarr, as they say, like, no, we don't play games like that anymore. Or at least game systems, if you design them like that and release them like that, you're going to get an awful lot of heat in the comments in terms of, this, you're not really doing anything here. You're just throwing numbers around and hoping that someone will.
Or you could release it to the OSR and get absolute praise. But
sure, yeah. Look, they have preserved a way of life that perhaps not a lot of role players would be familiar or comfortable with. And if that's fine by them, that's fine by them. I'm not going to yuck their yum.
Yeah,
but we are talking about how you take these numbers, try and fit them into a system that the GM is going to use to resolve a state of play or a potential change in state of play, and then what happens when you fail and fail bad? Like no comeback from that. What's the appropriate way to use these numbers and to say maybe safety net these systems so that there isn't abject failure, or your players understand what that means or what the likelihood of that is.
Well, there seems to be two distinct philosophies of what the dice rolls mean here, and one of them is a dice roll is representing the player's skill, as in is the player character good enough to do this. And that's not what this blog author is going with. They are coming up with an idea that it's representing the world, as in Traveller. As far as I can see, in all of its editions, Traveller has assumed that even starting characters are very competent, very capable. They know how to do their jobs. So under normal circumstances, they're going to succeed. And the dice rolls seem to represent extreme circumstances or the vagaries of fate, where, say, under normal circumstances, if there's a broken wire in some piece of equipment, you have the resources, your engineer character can just fix it. Now, if they're trying to do this in a hurry while being shot at, things are on fire and exploding around them, then that dice roll can represent, it's, for all your skill, your fingers may be slipping, because they're covered in grease. They're, because you don't have time to wipe your hands. You might be distracted by a sudden explosion, and that all gets neatly wrapped up into a roll. Hence, representing the world. It's
an interesting reinterpretation of what we might call in the modern day a sort of universal understanding that the dice roll is the effort of the character, and essentially you were putting out a sort of suggestion that first off, marrying a character's success to this fickle piece of plastic rather than to their dedicated stat number might not be inherently as narratively satisfying. We've all had games where our character had plus 27 in diplomacy, and we roll it and comes up with 2, and we're like, you sneeze in the king's face or something, and it's just like that, or you deliberately, the GM will say something like, oh, you accidentally say something that insults them, and just like, wait, when did I lose control of my character? When did I suddenly become this absolute moron, embarrassing himself and,
it breaks the fiction for the players who, are on paper and in their own minds have created competent characters. I would say that you should have breakpoints in a lot of these systems, especially ones with skill systems in games where you have breakpoints where, okay, look, you've got a plus 10 of the skill, or whatever it's going to be, and you're under no pressure. That's an automatic success. You're never going to fail that. You're always going to competently carry out the task. You're talking to the king. Is it very high pressure? Does the king want your head? Then, no matter what your success or what your skill rating is, yes, there's a chance that this might go very badly. You might misplace one word and it's off your head. Then you get characters to roll, but only because the stakes are that high that they have to roll. I think characters in game systems like this, players who want to play the system will build very competent characters with high stat bonuses, high skill bonuses, because they don't like the prospect of failure, nor should they. But when, if you get characters to roll for absolutely every damn thing, you are heightening the chance that they're going to fail abjectly more often than not, because that's the dice for you. The one is always present, and in a lot of these systems it says, doesn't matter how good you are at this, you vomited your lunch all over your own lap while trying to impress somebody. How's that going for you? GMs who have highly competent characters in front of them should be trying to avoid forcing rolls until it really matters. And when it really matters, there is always the chance of failure. Then you've got to figure out just what the consequences of that failure are going to be. Because if you have to deliver dire consequences for things these characters should basically be, do in their sleep, but somehow mess up, then it's probably, as much as it's going to ruin your player's day, it's probably going to ruin the flow of your game as well. Because all of a sudden, they're being chased out of town when they should have been receiving their first quest to help the town.
Yeah. Well, I think...
Why do we roll dice?
What's that, Owen?
Why do we roll dice?
Exactly.
No, real question. Why do you have a random generator in the game?
It creates excitement. It's the simple answer.
That's definitely a factor.
It's sort of to avoid the cops and robbers.
But that's what it comes down to,
where
right?
I shot you, no, I shot you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we need some way to figure this out.
I shot you, I dodge. I shoot you with my homing bullet, force field. I shoot you with my laser, passes through.
Yeah.
We got that one there because, hey, we don't want to have everything be a debate about who's right and who's wrong. So roll the dice instead, we'll accept the consequences. What is the game design function of rolling dice? Right? So, what are games? Big question. What are games?
Wasn't there
structured fun times?
Structured fun times is not a bad response.
Yeah. Agreed on rule set, and presumably we're going to get something out of it.
Basically, we all agree. Okay, we'll roll dice, and some of these results you nearly always succeed on. Some of these results you nearly always fail on, and then there's middle bit where it kind of matters how good you are. Is everyone sort of okay with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of the compromise we make. It's not terribly realistic, but we'll say it. Now, for example, let's say your skilled diplomat walks up and has to roll diplomacy on the king. Now, the game design reason he has to roll diplomacy on the king is so nothing is guaranteed. You have to take a risk, and you may not succeed. You're pushing your luck. It's probably not pushing your luck very much, but you're pushing your luck. So you roll the dice, and you roll a 1, so you fail. Now, your narration of why that happens is separate to your game design reason for rolling the dice. The game design reason for rolling the dice is nothing's guaranteed. Right? It's to put unpredictability in. You can't know for sure you're going to succeed. I roll a 1. Well, I'll use my reroll. Roll again. Another 1. You're like, that's unlikely. And it is unlikely, but it does happen. And you have to account for that when you're making your decisions about what you do in the game. That's the game design reason. Now, you can say your super skilled diplomat vomits on the king, all over the king, and the king's outraged. And that's stupid, though. From a narrative point of view, your guy looks like a moron. That's what the player objects to, looking like an idiot. If you're the GM and your super skilled diplomat goes and speaks to the king, and the king then suddenly gets outraged, you might say, well, you see, what happened was you mentioned the bonds of brotherhood. What you didn't know because the king has told nobody, is this guy is secretly his brother who's attacking them. And you just trying to get the king to fight his own brother, who's secretly his brother. He didn't know he was his brother. No one could know he was his brother. But there was something he didn't know that caused the thing. And that's more some of the emergent stuff you can do with failure. Where you can go, now, as a GM, you might need to know, you fail. Give me a minute. And I have to think of a good narrative reason for why a character who's so skilled at diplomacy could fail. And that's a great point to say, guys, 5 minutes, I need to think about something.
Yeah.
That's great. A very valuable tool in GMing is the ability to go, guys, I'm going to the toilet, give me a second there. Or, guys, I'm getting a drink, give me a second there. Because you want to actually think about why that guy failed. He never fails diplomacy tests. Ooh, do I just go, I brush it over and keep the game going? Or do I say, is there a way to put a new twist on things from this point on? And that's your opportunity to stop and think.
You can co-opt your players into this. So the order in which we do these things, especially when it comes to failure, really matters. Now you're going to need players on board, but I haven't tested this fully, but I've advocated for this idea that when it comes to things like social interactions, like trying to bribe a guard to get into the city or whatever, have the players roll the dice first and then narrate the results. So if they do cock it up, the player can now inject. If they can save face, they can make it funny. They can heighten the stakes. They've got some choices to make about narrating their failure. Players would spend all day telling you how they succeeded, but it's I think it's interesting, and it requires mature players to take it on the nose and go, okay, I really messed this up. Let's see how we can make this interesting, and maybe throw something to the GM that'll allow for, for this discussion to continue, or for another approach to be taken. But finding good reasons to fail.
Steal something from Old Wraith from White Wolf, right? When another player fails, you have one player there as their demon or their devil or whatever, and it's their job to narrate what happens when they fail.
Yeah,
and it's like, this isn't me. It's he's a jerk, not me. Sorry, I'm just a referee here.
But
handy.
It is interesting to put the thing as like, are we like Owen's example is of the GM takes a minute to come up with external sources of why the failure happened, but there's also the question of should we give the player examples of how they messed up? And that's sort of the dichotomy that these original articles are saying. It's like, is the dice roll representing the player's efforts? And in this one instance, the player overlooked something or made some social faux pas that ordinarily they would have caught, but this one instance it was in their blind spot? Or is this because of, no one could have known that the king's brother, and that talking about brotherhood would set him off? Yeah. No one could have known this. It was a great secret.
You make a great distinction, and the two approaches are sort of diametrically opposed. I think you've got both as part of the toolbox, because the king's secret brother is an externality. There's no way to account for that in terms of the character.
It's the world.
It's the world is causing this failure, and the GM, being the arbiter of what the world does, now has a moment, needs a toilet break to weave it in, and that's great. Now the player's left none the wiser while they're sitting there waiting for the toilet break to end. Like, what? I mean, why did that go so badly? They've got the dice roll result, and maybe they saw the dice roll result, maybe they didn't. Depends on what you're doing with that. But they are kind of left puzzling it. The GM should come back, obviously, with a new bit of world canon in mind, and some response to the player that can give them an insight into why they failed. What was it about? What set him off? What words did I use? Oh, it's when I started talking about brotherhood, he started getting red. Okay, that's something to investigate. Let's go back to the party and figure out what we're going to do about that. Time to investigate the king's family. Whereas the other approach, you are kind of, you're setting aside the opportunity you're essentially saying, well, it is the player's fault, and the player is now going to tell me why it's their fault in a face-saving way or a self-depreciating way or something like that. It'll be up to the player to come up with it. but you are kind of maybe closing off. The GM's not bringing anything new to it at that point, but maybe the player can find something to bring to it.
All of us can walk here, right?
Sure, yeah. I've walked over here.
None of us have ever asked for a player to make a roll to walk, right?
Not across level ground. In good light, no.
Okay.
Tight ropes and chasms.
How many of us have walked over level ground in real life and tripped?
Oh yeah, you hit.
Yeah.
I'm tripping over nothing.
You know,
it happens.
We all do it occasionally. Sometimes you just fail, and afterwards you go, "Why the hell did that happen?" I just one foot stuck onto the other, and I fell over. Why? You walk all the time. Oh,
that's
like failure could just happen sometimes. Unfortunately, it's gonna be like, well, maybe I was a bit tired, or maybe one of my leg muscles didn't respond properly, or
maybe walking tests, you're going to fail some of them.
Yeah. And that's the reason why we don't ask people to roll walking tests. But in reality, people occasionally just trip. People fall over. And sometimes get very badly hurt doing it. Tripped on pavement, face planted into the ground, badly injured themselves.
Like, even without tripping, there's stories of people breaking bones of their feet just from walking. It happens.
Do you remember there was that story in Maynooth about a woman who she got attacked in the middle of the street late at night and really badly injured, and had her face smashed off the pavement, and there was this look for who's this brutal assaulter, and there was all this look, and eventually they figured out what happened was she was wearing a really heavy rucksack, and she tripped and she fell and she smashed her face off the thing so hard that they thought she'd been attacked. It's like, what? Yeah. Stuff like that happens sometimes. Players can just fail. So sometimes it's like, yeah. And you just failed is unsatisfying narratively, though. So we look for reasons. And that is the bit where maybe you narrate it, maybe the player narrates it, maybe a different player narrates it. Because some players will never sell anything. I failed, it's because, someone else messed it up for me. That guy got in the way, And some players will never sell their losses and sell stuff that's going wrong, in which case you need a different player to do it for them.
Some players
not necessarily yeah.
But some players love self-sabotaging though. Like this swings both ways. Some people, if you tell them they have failed a roll, they will gleefully narrate their own downfall. Sometimes with even more than if they'd succeed, happiness than if they succeeded. It's different strokes for different folks. But that's part of the thing is because in modern RPG design, we're so reliant on a universal system. We don't have the flexibility to say, well, in this instance, so when Jimmy fails at a dice roll, it has to be the GM who comes up with someone because he doesn't trust another player to come up with something satisfying. But if Janie fails, she wants to be the one. She won't even wait. Sometimes she will assume, even if she rolls slightly low, she'll assume she failed and start narrating her failure, even though she actually succeeded. It's the sort of the system can't, it's a question of should you set a default for your system, or is this such a personal group based thing that as the old Traveller designers would put it, it was better not to put in a universal guideline so that the GM would have the flexibility to adjust to their party. I guess is the question there.
So, if we come forward to more modern systems, then I think there's an interesting aspect of system design now, where instead of these flat one is a failure, that's it. You see systems that allow for negotiation of the stakes and the consequences, like mechanical negotiation between the player and the GM. Blades of the Dark comes to mind. I think Numenera had some of it, although it's kind of more front-loaded in terms of how many resources do you want to spend before you attempt this role to ensure success. And then you've got things like the Genesis system where there's interpretive failure based on kind of runic dice outcomes. So these are what would be, going back to the cops and robbers argument. Instead, now we're giving players and GMs the means by which they can negotiate the terms of failure. What do we think about that stuff?
I think there's some good gameplay in that in terms of how bad is the failure. And sometimes, though, that's a way some games go, well, the failure is how you gain XP.
Yeah,
when you
I've
fail a
seen that.
test, you mark your skill and you have a chance to advance it then. Or if you fail a test, cool, gain an XP and move on. Or if you fail a test, either do this or narrate what happens to you and how you're hampered by it and gain an XP. So there's ways you can go, okay, well, actually, I gained something from failure. That the failure advances things in other ways. I get some XP or I get a reroll or I get something I can use later on. And that can be valuable, but can also make circumstances where the players try to make lots of rolls, so they fail lots of rolls, so they get more XP. And that's a separate problem you're having. But we've all had the day where someone's rolling really poorly and you want to give them a hand out somehow, like, can we do something for them? Because that person's day is sucking. So, it comes down to failure and success are mechanically very important, but they also have to serve a design goal function. And at the same time, they cannot gate gameplay. It's a very complex subject. Whereas when I go make a perception test, what is the most you gain and what is the most you lose from a perception test? That's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It can't gate the gameplay, right? It's bad scenario design to have. Make the perception test or you don't notice that the book has been stolen. And if you don't notice the book is stolen, the rest of the scenario doesn't progress, right? Asking everyone to make a perception test for something vital is not what you should do, because there's a chance that everyone will fail. But at the same time, not having perception tests means that there's no kind of risk and reward and stuff, and then people can afford to not invest in perception. So is perception the most important skill or the least important skill? And it's often in the game it's the most important skill. Yeah.
There's I could think of ways to balance that, though, as in, say the book's been stolen and you ask people, the GM asks people to make a perception test. That might not be to that, you don't see that the book is missing at all. It might be a case of how quickly you realize it, as in,
or who notices you're looking for it.
Yeah, and that's always another line. But if the players get really good perception rolls, it could be a case of the thief might still be in the building, and depending on where the plot needs to go, where the scenario is. Well, depending on the details of the scenario, that could spin things in a very interesting direction. You've got there's certainly gradients between nothing happens and, well, might as well not bother investing in skills because they're not rolled. Those players will quite sensibly realise, well, that's a waste of points.
Yeah, if they get the sense that you're going to softball this stuff, or it's always going to be dealt with narratively, then why engage with the system? I think modern systems have gotten better at laying out some parameters with which to deal with success and failures of this nature. But yeah, I think there's certain games that don't handle it very well, and as Owen mentioned, there's often times where you're going to get the failure, but you get a prize to take home in terms of XP or an insight bonus or a chance to improve the skill in the future. There's which, especially when your paladin has failed the 5th consecutive stealth check, you're going to appreciate. As you're trying to get the party through the woods. And in those cases, I do prefer to see kind of group checks that only have to accumulate, a certain amount of successes and have everybody then succeed off the back of the group's efforts, rather than each person's out on their own, trying not to make too much noise. Right, we're rolling up on the half-hour mark. Anything else we need to add to this?
I just wonder if there's anything to the idea of where universal skill systems inevitable. Was it inevitable that we were going to go from this sort of early system of Gargayak says roll d6 if it's 1 or 2 you succeed, and these traveler riders, they would have had certain ideas of okay, don't roll if it's a normal task and you have a +1. Most of the time you're going to roll 2d6 and looking for 7s or 10s, but here's the probabilities for other dice rolls if you want to mess with the bell curves. And they left up to the GM to say what your roll was. But as I say, history proved that people responded far better to universal systems, but those have disadvantages of sort of putting so much onus on the character's role. And I guess this article is arguing that in a non-universal system, it's a lot easier to justify, it was something in the world. Like, it's not that your hacking roll failed, it's that actually the door is rusted or something. Or, it's not that, you sneeze in the king's face, it's that there was a secret brother who makes the negotiations more difficult. And I guess my question is there anything to that? Is there anything like the article's making the argument that we might have lost something in this drive towards a universal system, but clearly we've gained something as well. Otherwise, universal systems would not have been as entrenched as they have been. Or is that too much?
Well, perhaps a subject for another time.
Yes.
Certainly a rich avenue to explore on another occasion. Dave?
Yeah, I think it does behoove a GM to have a think about what a skill roll actually entails, what it actually means in a world, like in a game. And also, I think there's a lot to be drawn from the idea of the skill roll representing the vagaries of the world and potentially plot hooks that were previously unknown to the players or may not have existed up until that point. Changing the world with dice rolls unbeknownst to the players.
Yeah, I think they call it the oracular power of the dice is a phrase I've seen thrown around a few times, including that article.
Yeah, and
I'm going to have to look that one up.
All right,
and then Owen.
I mean, you have to get into stuff because it's a complex topic for me, because you have to get into stuff like why you roll dice and when you should roll dice, and are dice a kind of tactical thing where you've got to risk the dice, or are they something you can obligate with effort? You can just be like, no, my plan is good enough that I don't need to roll dice. My plan does not rely on rolling dice. Should there be an element of chance there? And in a good tactical game, there should be an element of chance, because your plans shouldn't be guaranteed, because that makes people have to kind of think harder and go, okay, I can't just go, I cast a fireball in here and everyone dies because there's nowhere to jump out of the way. Like, no, there's still always a save. Someone can always manage something. And that cuts both ways, of course, because it means the players always get a chance to save or always get a chance to get out of it. And that a failure should never put you in a hole so deep that a success couldn't dig you out of, and vice versa. So, yeah. So,
yeah.
That's what I come down on. It's a complicated topic.
Yeah, I'd broadly agree. I think fewer, more significant rolls is probably better, and failure shouldn't be the end, but an opportunity or a moment which requires a pivot from the players. Plan A has not worked, or is in danger of falling apart. What are you going to do to keep it on the rails, or what can you pivot to ensure that ultimately you succeed? And sometimes things go wrong. That's the nature of the game. And sometimes you get it wrong, and that's just the nature of being an imperfect being in a hostile and weird world. The GM is hopefully on your side enough to see you through. Well, we'd like to hear your thoughts, folks, on when it's good to fail, how often you should be looking for these sorts of checks from players. What's a GM's responsibility when it comes to refereeing failure. Join us in our Discord, link in the show notes. Join us for the party in general. You'll find lots of different topics being discussed. But for now, this party's over. Thank you for listening to the Adventuring Party. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can head on over to SpeakPipe and drop us a line. Or you can join us on our Discord server, where we keep the party going after hours. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or Twitter, or you can email the hosts at party@theadventuringparty.net. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike version 3 license. But you probably knew that already. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and look forward to seeing you back here next week. Goodbye.